Contented Media presents Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto, with Mark Hunter and Arthur Van Pelt.
Hello and welcome to the final episode in 2022 of Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto, the podcast that does all it can to ensure that Craig Wright gets a stocking full of Australian coal from Santa this Christmas. My name is Mark Hunter, mince pie aficionado and present rapper by royal appointment, and joining me, as always, is the man who will be wearing the red suit and delivering the black stuff to a certain house in Surrey. It's Arthur Van Pelt. Arthur, it's the final show of the year. How time flies, eh?
Oh yeah, say that again, Mark. I mean, imagine this is the first full calendar year of creating these podcasts together. And yeah, who had thought when we came together in summer 2021 to discuss your idea of doing the Dr. Bitcoin podcast together?
Yeah, indeed. I notice you're pinning all the blame on me there.
Well, yeah, it was your idea originally.
I get the libel lawsuit. Now, it's Christmas time, a time of traditions, and so we're keeping ours by starting this final episode of 2022 in Lawsuit Corner. This month saw the first responses to the Bitcoin passing off lawsuit that Craig Wright filed against Kraken and Coinbase back in July, with Kraken first up. Arthur, given that we haven't talked about this one for a while, what are the passing off lawsuits all about?
Yeah, well, that's a bit of a long, somewhat convoluted story, Mark. Craig Wright claims that he or an entity that he controls called Wright International Investments, and let's call them WII like in the lawsuit, owns all the copyright on Bitcoin since the moment Bitcoin was released in January 2009. And Craig Wright and WII are the two claimants in these passing off lawsuits. Craig continues by claiming that in August 2017 there was an airdrop where Bitcoin split from Bitcoin Cash, and Bitcoin Cash was actually the real Bitcoin from that moment. Then in November 2018 there was another airdrop where Bitcoin SV continued as the real Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash split away from what Craig perceives as the real Bitcoin. So these passing off lawsuits are about exchanges and developers misrepresenting Bitcoin, as in BTC, to the whole world as the real Bitcoin, while Craig argues that Bitcoin SV is the real Bitcoin. So Craig wants exchanges and developers to correct this situation and recognize BSV as the real Bitcoin. Yeah, and meanwhile, requesting billions in damages.
Kraken's response was simple and to the point. It rebuffed almost every argument made by Wright, refuted his version of Bitcoin's history, and made several key observations. The first was that when nChain announced the launch of BSV, it did so with an acknowledgement that it was a fork of Bitcoin Cash and not a fork of Bitcoin itself, which of course Wright contends that it was. Kraken said, "The nChain announcement explicitly recognised that this Bitcoin SV software was intended for the BCH system, not the Bitcoin system, and that BCH was a distinct cryptocurrency from Bitcoin. For example, the announcement included statements that 1. Bitcoin SV was a BCH implementation choice, and for use on BCH. 2. Code audits would be conducted for the good of the entire BCH ecosystem. And 3. As part of its bug bounty program, rewards would be payable in BCH. Kraken then went on to say that when BSV split from Bitcoin Cash in late 2018, Jimmy Wynn himself acknowledged this in an article from the Bitcoin Association for BSV, in which he wrote the lines, "Emerging from the contentious November 15, 2018 hard fork of the Bitcoin Cash BCH network, BSV now stands as its own chain and token, and in August 2017, Bitcoin Cash emerged as a supposed effort to reclaim the original Satoshi vision." Kraken then argues that even CoinGeek was on board with the idea that BSV grew out of Bitcoin Cash and not Bitcoin, citing a piece from Kurt Wuckert Jr. in which he said, "The most important thing to note from this era is that the emergent BSV blockchain was created by the guile of the ABC cartel. There was no plan in the SV camp to create an SV coin, but it was foisted upon the world so that Amaury Sachet, a Bitcoin Cash developer, could be king of BCH, Bitcoin Cash, while keeping it very small and not having to deal with dissent." Kraken also pointed out that Bitcoin Cash holders were given an equal amount of BSV coins during the split, while Bitcoin holders got nothing, further evidence of a divorce from the original Bitcoin. Arthur, Kraken also cited the numerous lawsuits in which Wright's evidence has been called into question, and they included a nugget from the Hodlonaut trial, didn't they?
Oh yeah, they actually did. Kraken filed a so-called consolidated defense in which we can find the following quote. Judgment of the Oslo District Court dated the 20th of October 2022, in which the Oslo District Court found that statements made by Hodlonaut in March 2019 that the first claimant, which is Craig Wright of course, was not Satoshi Nakamoto, were not unlawful. The court believes that Hodlonaut had sufficient factual grounds to claim that Wright had lied and cheated in his attempt to prove that he is Satoshi Nakamoto. And another quote comes up. The court believes that Hodlonaut had sufficient factual grounds to claim that Craig Wright is not Satoshi Nakamoto in March 2019. So that's it, Mark. That is what Kraken indeed had in their lawsuit filings.
Kraken added that, for Wright to back up his spurious claims, it demanded strict proof, which, as we know, is generally either fraudulent or comes by way of historical second-hand tales from friends and family. Arthur, Kraken also picked up on the claim that in 2009, Craig Wright transferred all the Bitcoin IP over to WII. What's the story here?
Yeah, in that same consolidated defense of November the 28th, they said this. In a letter dated the 29th of October 2021, purporting to be a pre-action letter, but insufficiently detailed for that purpose, which was sent by the claimant's solicitors to the first defendant, the claimant stated, in 2009, all of the intellectual property rights in the Bitcoin software and database were assigned by Dr. Wright. The assignee was WII. It is not understood on what basis the first claimant is said to have standing to bring this claim, if, as stated in the letter, he has assigned any IP rights he owned in Bitcoin to the second claimant. So basically, Kraken wants more proof of this claim that Craig Wright created from thin air.
Yeah, so he's saying that in 2009 he transferred all the IP related to Bitcoin development over to this Wright International Investments Company. That sounds like almost the least Satoshi-like thing I can think of, especially in that really early time. I think we can look forward to a bit more document debunking there, don't you?
Yeah, it looks like that indeed. Or more excuses why Craig doesn't have these documents anymore.
Yeah. Kraken then tackled Wright's Bitcoin creation story, stating in no uncertain terms that, to date, the first claimant has failed to provide any credible evidence that he is Satoshi. On several occasions, when the first claimant has chosen to proffer evidence that supports his claim, that evidence has been shown to be inauthentic or of, at the very least, questionable authenticity or provenance. Kraken then goes on to mention the Copa case, which we'll come to in a bit, where Wright's identity as Satoshi is at the core of the issue, and adds that, despite them knowing they will have to provide proof of Wright's Satoshiness for that case, the claimants have merely reasserted said claim in the POC, Particulars of Claim, and have provided no documents by way of initial disclosure in support. Of course, we all know why no documents have been provided by Wright in support of his claim. Kraken then listed 7 claims made by Wright in relation to Bitcoin's creation that they denied ever happened, and Arthur, they also picked up on an issue over BSV's micropayments claim, didn't they?
Yeah, indeed they did. Kraken states it is denied that the Bitcoin system is a micropayment system, or that this is a key object of the Bitcoin system. The Bitcoin system is an electronic payment system as described in the white paper. It is not a system specifically for micropayments. And you know, Mark, the funny thing is, on December the 12th, I tweeted about this subject when I found a tweet of Craig Wright that he would sue people for perjury when they mention something about micropayments that Craig perceives as being wrong. So Craig said, the lawyers in the various cases that are underway have been instructed formally that if any of the developers or exchanges put information on their oath that Bitcoin was never about micropayments but they didn't realize it was designed to scale on-chain, they will be formally charged with perjury. Over the last few years we have been collecting early statements made by each of these individuals and companies referencing the early nature of Bitcoin. Now, yeah, and I couldn't help in my tweet to put that alongside a literal quote of Satoshi, which I found on the Bitcoin Talk forum. You're not going to believe this, but literally Satoshi said, Bitcoin isn't currently practical for very small micropayments.
Another cell phone for the collection.
Oh my God, yeah, of course, yeah. A bit later on, he said in that same post, Bitcoin is practical for smaller transactions than are practical with existing payment methods, small enough to include what you might call the top of the micropayment range, but it doesn't claim to be practical for arbitrary small micropayments. So yeah, this completely contradicts Craig's reference to the early days of Bitcoin, and I mean, you wouldn't even find those things in the white paper.
Kraken then took aim at Wright's assertion that he undertook responsibility for the development and the commercial activities of the Bitcoin system, saying that at all material times the developers have comprised a growing and shifting group of contributors, and saying that it didn't understand what Wright meant by commercial activities. Wright had then claimed that from around 2011, 3 people were employed to assist with the running of the commercial activities, a number that increased to 50 by 2015, and later Bitcoin's commercial activities required the talents of hundreds of employees. Kraken said that these claims were embarrassing for lack of particularization, criticizing Wright for failing to mention, among much else, the identity of the alleged employers and the nature of the alleged commercial activities undertaken. The rebuttal also included a dismissal of Wright's claim that the alert key granted the holder unilateral power over the Bitcoin system, something we discussed in last month's episode, before Kraken attempted to put Wright straight on a few technical points about Bitcoin. Arthur, what were these points and who was right?
Yeah, Kraken nailed Craig on a few things that the real Satoshi undoubtedly would have understood perfectly, while Craig is giving a very incompetent picture of things. For example, and this is one of those beauties, so let me quote from the Consolidated Defense again. Other white paper concepts which were originally implemented by the Bitcoin system were subsequently changed, including because of errors in the white paper. For example, according to section 5 of the white paper, nodes always consider the longest chain to be the correct one. However, Kraken says, this could be exploited, and so in July 2010, Satoshi himself altered this such that nodes would consider the greatest cumulative work chain rather than the longest chain to be the correct one. So yeah, there you go. But furthermore, Kraken denies that all Bitcoin transactions are being recorded on the Bitcoin blockchain. And they deny that all transactions are visible to everyone. And they want to know from Craig what he means with Bitcoin's core design. They also deny that all nodes store full copies of the blockchain. They deny that all mining nodes accept all transactions, as mining nodes can choose to ignore or reject unconfirmed transactions for any reason. They deny that Bitcoin is typically a microtransaction system. And they lecture Craig on how changes and updates are implemented in Bitcoin, well, etc., 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 Mark. So all in all, it paints a painful picture of Craig Wright having no clue whatsoever how Bitcoin actually works. And Kraken on the fly is giving him a crash course in a legal document about it.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kraken did slip up once, at least I think they did, when they called Bitcoin a currency, which legally speaking in the UK it certainly isn't. But Arthur, they did make a very good point over the timing of the complaint, didn't they?
Oh yeah. I actually had to giggle when I read that, Mark. I mean, Kraken argues that Craig Wright didn't complain not in 2015, not in 2016, not in 2017, not in 2018, when Bitcoin, according to Craig at least, started to drift away from the characteristics that Craig thinks define Bitcoin. And I found this quote in that section hilarious. It is inferred that the first claimant has been aware of the use of the name Bitcoin on the Coinbase website by reason of the fact that he is a customer of the Kraken exchange and held BTC on the Kraken exchange.
So he hates it, but he still held it. He still owns some, and he may have benefited from profiting from it as well.
Yeah, I mean he has been using it since I mean, from our previous episodes, our listeners will know that Craig has been buying Bitcoin. It was in April 2013. He went to the Mt. Gox website and opened an account. He deposited 5,000 Australian dollars and started buying some Bitcoin. But since 2013, and especially since 2015, when he came out for the first time as a Satoshi candidate, he never complained about these things. He has always been looking at Bitcoin, the BTC in this case, as Bitcoin, and only recently, with his own crippled version of knockoff of Bitcoin Cash, he thinks that it should be different. Yeah, makes no sense, of course.
With the defence having now been filed, the next stage will be a costs and case management conference, which is where the case will be put in front of a judge for the first time. Although, Arthur, we got a rather interesting theory as to the approach that Kraken and presumably Coinbase will take, didn't we?
Yes, absolutely. Because there's another case going on, and that is the COPA case, Cryptocurrency Open Patents Alliance. And in that case, where Craig Wright is being attacked on his stance that he is having copyright on the Bitcoin white paper. So basically, everyone is considering this as the Craig is not Satoshi Nakamoto case. So when COPA, in which, as we all know, Coinbase and Kraken are members and added parties to the lawsuit, is winning that case, many other cases, including these passing off lawsuits, can piggyback on that ruling. So what might happen is that Kraken and Coinbase are going to try to do exactly that. Have their cases paused and ask the judges to patiently wait for the outcome of the COPA case. So does that make sense to you, Mark?
Yeah, I think so. I think I would try and do the same, because if he loses the COPA case, then the Kraken and Coinbase cases are more or less null and void. So why would you go through the hassle and the money spending of starting these cases off when they could be struck out, essentially, some way down the line? It doesn't make sense to even start them, does it?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. I mean, and we call that piggybacking, but basically all those cases are based on the premise that Craig is Satoshi, but the moment that he is not Satoshi anymore and cannot claim any copyright and intellectual property Bitcoin related from the early days, the whole house of cards will come tumbling apart.
Wright said that the filing was poorly crafted and full of errors, which of course he would, seeing as it disagrees with his version of history, although he didn't point out any specific ones. A few days later, as you mentioned, Arthur, he went on to say that we, although it wasn't exactly clear who we is, have spent years collecting early statements made by all the individuals and companies that Wright is currently suing, where they compare Bitcoin to a micropayment platform. The reason for this is that he can shove it in their face and charge them with perjury if they say anything contradictory on the stand. Arthur, Craig Wright probably doesn't want to be throwing stones considering the size of his own glass house here, does he?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true, Mark. Craig states that Satoshi never used Bitcoin Talk, but in the filing he uses a direct quote from Satoshi from that forum, and surprise, surprise, he states very clearly that Satoshi wrote on Bitcoin Talk.
Whatever happens with this case, it's going to be years before we get anything like a verdict, and we'll have to wait and see what emerges down the line. This month, we also saw Wright's appeal against the dismissal of his case against the developers heard in London. This, for those who need reminding, is the case related to the alleged pineapple hack on Craig Wright's home network, more information on which you can get through Series 1, Episode 5 of this podcast series. Back in March this year, Wright's case, which he is making through Tulip Trust Limited, or TTL, was dismissed after the judge, Justice Falk, found that Wright did not present a serious case to be tried. He was given leave to appeal, which he did, and this month's 2-day hearing, in front of a panel of 3 appeal court judges, saw both sides arguing the case. Side note, there was no word from Calvin Ayre on whether he believed the judges were experienced enough to hear the case. Presumably, he was waiting for the outcome. These 2 days were live streamed and recorded, and so we have the benefit of being able to hear proceedings firsthand. Now, we're not going to go over all the points raised because they are identical to the ones raised in the initial case, but we'll give you a brief overview of what went on and pick out some highlights. Day 1 was a fairly dry affair, with Wright's counsel reiterating the points made in the initial filing in 2020, although there were a couple of interesting moments where it was made clear that the appeal judges were clued in. The first concerned an analogy made regarding someone buying a safe.
Let's imagine that person A built a safe and invited person B to use it to store valuables, which could be dealt with by him at any moment using the key to the safe, which is given by person A. A and B don't enter into a contract. Person A, as the manufacturer of the safe, was in a position to change the safe's lock or to use a master key to open the safe and take person B's valuables, and person B is not in a position to prevent A from doing so. Person B has no other way of ever accessing his valuables without the key. He cannot physically break into the safe, for example, and if person B has his key stolen, he'll be powerless to stop the thief using his key from accessing the safe. If person B has his key stolen, he could legitimately expect A to assist him by changing the lock and giving him a new key, or using a master key to access the safe to allow him to move his assets to safety, rather than one, blocking him from ever retrieving his valuables, and two, knowingly allowing the third-party thief ready access to the valuables.
However, this analogy didn't square with one of the judges.
I find that quite a difficult analogy. If I buy a safe and I lose the key, what duty has the seller or the manufacturer to supply me with another one?
It's the question of power. It's not a question of you just buying a safe and taking it home and you having control of it. The key distinction here is that the person from whom you've acquired access to the safe retains complete control over it. Still in his domain, he has the master key, he can abuse his position. That's the key distinction.
Arthur, it seems to me like the master key referred to here is the entire collection of Bitcoin miners and developers who could, if they so desired, perform the necessary steps to freeze and reassign coins. But it's not as easy as simply slotting in a master key, is it?
No, I don't think so. Certainly not. I mean, Bitcoin cannot be compared to a safe with a master key. The difference is that a safe and a master key are being produced and used in a centralized way, making it possible for a centralized party to create and, when needed, to recreate and reobtain the master key of the safe and use it to open up a locked out safe. But meanwhile, with Bitcoin, things work completely different. Bitcoin development is not only open source, but on top of that, it's also fully decentralized. Anyone could potentially create a Bitcoin improvement proposal, or a BIP as it is called, to regain access to lost Bitcoin. But imagine, Mark, coding, testing, submitting a BIP for implementation and usage in real life, in the Bitcoin Live environment, is also, what I said, completely decentralized. It needs developers, it needs mining nodes, it needs full nodes, basically the whole Bitcoin infrastructure worldwide to cooperate at the same time, having their noses in the same direction to make this work. But for highly controversial proposals like reassigning Bitcoin tokens, well, this will prove to be an impossible undertaking. Mark my words.
The bulk of the day's hearing was dedicated to Wright's counsel trying to get the point across that Justice Falk was wrong in determining that there was no fiduciary duty owed by the developers to the holders of cryptocurrency assets, and that the details of the case were so novel and complex that it was unfair to have them dismissed out of hand rather than be heard at trial, where the points could be discussed. The counsel for the developers then made a good point about Wright's actions after the alleged hack.
And it is a mystery to us why TTL did not seek urgent interim relief when the hack occurred, as so many victims or alleged victims of misappropriated crypto assets have done successfully before the courts here in London and in the rest of the common law world, Singapore, Cayman Islands amongst them.
Arthur, this is a very good point, isn't it? Instead of asking the police or the courts to issue a freezing order on the coins, Wright kept quiet for 3 months and then sued the developers to get the coins back. Now, he could argue that the freezing order would have been pointless because who would it have been served on, but in suing the developers as individuals, he's utterly undermined that argument anyway. Even if the freezing order hadn't resulted in the coins coming back to him, it would have massively helped him in the case, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so, Mark. But then we have to presume that the freezing order for Bitcoin, and I mean the real Bitcoin here, BTC, would have been accepted and followed all over the world. And I have my serious doubts that would ever happen.
I agree with you on that point, but I think just being able to walk into a courtroom and wave a bit of paper and say, here, I've got a police-confirmed Bitcoin freezing order for my Bitcoin, it just helps on like an initial scale, doesn't it?
Yeah, Yeah, but it's a scenario that they are trying with BSV. On BSV it could work because they are so centralized as centralized can be, but on BTC, again, I have my serious doubts that it will work. Never.
This then led on to the balance of power as regards the coins Wright says was stolen, where Greg Maxwell's name was brought up and used as an example of a developer.
Tulip knows exactly what it possesses on the blockchain. It knows that the alphanumeric code, which appears on the blockchain, is its. Something, again, Mr. Maxwell did not know. And it knows what its private key is, where it's stored, and what precautions or otherwise it has or hasn't put in place to secure that private key. So at the point that the hack occurs, we ask the question, and it's not rhetorical, where does the real power lie in relation to the asset in question, the Bitcoin? Well, it certainly doesn't lie with Mr. Maxwell. It can't. He has no visibility, no knowledge, no power of or control over what on earth is happening in whatever home office in Surrey the computer happened to be in. So does that position change at the point of the hack? Well, no. Because, as my Lord saw yesterday, paragraph 40 of the particulars of claim, which we assume to be true, and on this occasion we accept are true, was a bolt out of the blue to Mr. Maxwell and his fellow defendants. Because with no prior knowledge of the hack, no invitation to assist, no intervention to intervene, no opportunity to advise Tulip what it might sensibly do to mitigate the hack, namely, don't wipe your systems, because that will destroy any prospect of recovering the private key and also eliminate evidence of how the hack occurred. And by the way, why didn't you have an encrypted, safe, separate copy of your private key, given it was holding, you say, $4.5 billion worth of your assets? None of those opportunities were afforded to Mr. Maxwell. What Mr. Maxwell gets is a letter out of the blue telling him, ex post facto, that there has been a misappropriation of Tulip's Bitcoin. It doesn't tell him anything about Tulip's attempts to recover it. Doesn't really tell him very much about the hack at all. It simply tells him to come forward and sort the mess out for Tulip by applying a patch to the network.
Conversation then turned to the patch, or as BSV calls it, the notary tool, that would allow TTL to reclaim its stolen coins. Arthur, TTL's lawyers argued that, according to Craig Wright, such a patch could be used that would affect only Wright's coins and not the entire blockchain. Two things, is this correct? And if not, what effect would a global Bitcoin patch have on the network?
Yes, it is my presumption that that is correct, Mark. A patch, well coded, could, or at least should, only affect Bitcoin tokens on one Bitcoin address. Of course, we are talking about the addresses 1 Feeks and 12 IP7 here, and these addresses don't belong to Craig Wright in any capacity as we know, but that's another story. But imagine the precedent that it would create on a global scale, being able to freeze Bitcoins, not done by the owner, but by an external party. Bitcoin would instantly lose its fungibility, and exchanges, funds and other large holders of Bitcoin, actually every holder of Bitcoin when I think of it, would always feel a sort of sword of Damocles hanging above them about when their coins might be frozen under their asses. So again, it's not going to work, Mark. Such a Bitcoin system would not be widely accepted.
Wright himself found the day's conversation incredibly illuminating, tweeting, "Given the false representations and perjurious statements that have been made in the British court today at the bequest of the core developers, a suit will follow the criminal misrepresentation, perjury, fraud, and a few other deception claims against them." He then argued with the claim made during the session that Bitcoin developers come and go but are not appointed. The claim that core developers are not appointed is easily discredited. Gavin was appointed by myself. I told him to appoint a few other individuals to help him. Of course, if the trial goes ahead, everyone will look forward to Wright proving that. Wright signed off this little rant by saying, "The current statements and the responses under witness statements have now given me everything I need. Have a nice day." So there we go. Calvin's Christmas present from Craig Wright this year is another lawsuit to pay for. We're not expecting the judgment on this matter until early 2023, with the result either being an upholding of the initial dismissal by Justice Falk, or, if Wright were to win, a full trial, where we could, for the first time, find out lots of interesting details about the Pineapple hack itself and get the answers to some long-awaited questions. Finally, in Lawsuit Corner for this year, Craig Wright got an early Christmas present when the judge in his case against Peter McCormack, in which Wright won a grand total of £1 and was castigated for putting together a deliberately false case, ruled on the remaining issues. Now, we weren't expecting the ruling to come so quickly after the hearing, which took place on December 20th, but it arrived the next day, so we decided to dedicate this month's bonus episode to a much more detailed breakdown of the ruling. However, what we can reveal is that Justice Chamberlain considered 4 points. First, whether Wright had broken an embargo when he discussed a draft ruling in his Slack group. Second, whether Peter McCormack should be issued with an injunction to stop him repeating the claims that led to the libel action. Third, whether Wright should be allowed to appeal the award of just £1. And fourth, the costs. With regard to the embargo, Wright had crowed in his Slack group about his victory before the verdict had been made public, which was brought to the judge's attention. Arthur, what did Justice Chamberlain have to say about this?
Yeah, this was a very interesting aspect of Judge Chamberlain's recent judgment, wasn't it? He ordered a directions hearing related to this, which means that a specialized judge will determine if Craig Wright should have a case for contempt of court started against him. It turns out that in the UK they are pretty serious about these things, and I looked it up, but when this is going to happen, Craig runs the risk, and I quote from the government's website, up to 2 years in prison, a fine, or both. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that this is going somewhere, Mark.
Yeah, I thought initially that because it was a civil case, you could only be tried with civil contempt, but it seems that it can carry an equally a serious penalty as criminal contempt, so yeah, who knows? Secondly, the injunction. Justice Chamberlain weighed up various issues at hand before deciding that the costs McCormack had had to bear throughout the trial, which we'll come to in a second, were enough of a deterrent against future comments by McCormack, meaning that, unusually in a libel trial, there would be no injunction on McCormack to legally prevent him from talking about the trial and what led to it. Thirdly, on the matter of an appeal, Justice Chamberlain noted that Wright's intended appeal didn't argue with his finding that Wright had advanced a deliberately false case, accepting that he had lied throughout. This went against Calvin Ayre's assertion that the damage was real, but that Ontier just did a bad job of reporting it. Perhaps they're not very good liars, Calvin. As it was, the judge rejected Wright's application to appeal, given that there was absolutely no basis on which to do so. Finally, to the costs. Judge Chamberlain ruled that McCormack owed Wright around £900,000 on failed motions in the lead-up to the trial, despite it being based on a false premise, while Wright will pay for everything else on both sides, taking his bill to a whopping £6 million. But Arthur, this could be somewhat reversed, couldn't it?
Well, yeah, it appears so, Mark. I had to read that part of the judgment a few times to get the full picture, but Judge Chamberlain is of the opinion that previous paid costs by Peter could very likely not be overturned and are final. And he mentioned something of an opening though, and allow me to quote the judgment. If, as I have found, there is no proper basis to set aside the Dagnall and Knowles orders under CPR 3.1, then CPR 44.11 cannot be used to achieve the same thing by other means. CPR 44.11 may still be relevant at the next stage when the costs come to be assessed. If the cost judge concludes that the dishonesty I identified in my main judgment generated costs on particular issues, he or she can use CPR 44.11 to disallow those costs or order Dr. Wright to pay the cost of those issues to Mr. McCormack. But that will be a matter for the cost judge. So what we understand here, at least I understand it, is that it is left to the cost judge to determine if a certain rule called CPR 44.11 is applicable and may lead to previous costs being paid back in part or whole by Craig Wright. That's how I understand it.
As I said, we'll have much more on this in our December bonus episode, so keep a lookout for that in the next week or two. Before we leave Lawsuit Corner, we got a great insight this month into the mental gymnastics that go on in the heads of the BSV community when it comes to defending Craig Wright. Crypto Devil on Twitter, who Arthur I think you know well, posted a run-of-the-mill Craig debunk over the OneFeeks wallet, which sparked an argument that turned into a debate over the evidence presented in the Hodlonaut trial. Now, as we know, there was some evidence that made it from the Kleiman trial into this one, but the main focus was on Calvin Ayre's boxload of new evidence that was reviewed and eviscerated by KPMG. Arthur, remind us of a few examples of this evidence.
Oh yeah, we had plenty. We had early white paper drafts, we had source code files, and we had I think 2 Bitcoin.exe files, stuff like that. It was all found to be created from existing files that were found in the public domain and changed and backdated by Craig Wright. KPMG did a really good job there, exposing a completely new line of Craig Wright forgeries here.
Now, one respondent on Twitter, who I'm not going to name, but who is frequently discussing his feelings on our content, actually said this in response to the KPMG report. Hodlonaut's lawyers were confused about the documents they asked KPMG to examine. I'm not sure, but it seems to me like the Wright team intentionally tricked them into looking into some random confusing old documents as a red herring. I don't know what you thought that silly report showed. When CryptoDevil argued back that KPMG pulled apart all the evidence, including any that had previously been entered into trial, this person replied, "You misunderstand what happened. None of that was presented as evidence by the Wright team in that case. They presented testimony. If they'd presented it, they would have explained the history and context of the documents, which is complex. Instead, they let the Hodlonaut team be wrong." When CryptoDevil pointed out the modern consensus document, which for absolute clarity we should point out most certainly wasn't entered into the Kleiman case, this was the reply. "I'm not familiar with that document. The Wright team presented no new documents in the Hodlonaut case and didn't base their case on any documents. Did you pay attention to their actual case at all?" Arthur, this line of reasoning explains a lot, doesn't it? Here's someone who willfully ignored a huge element of the Hodlonaut case because it doesn't fit with his existing theory, and rather than checking his own facts, suggested instead that Craig Wright intentionally planted red herrings as evidence to, make Hodlonaut's team look stupid or something? This is just another level, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It takes the mind of a devoted cult member to think like that. Craig was requested to bring his best Satoshi evidence, and it was all debunked as backdated forgeries again. It's that simple. Full stop.
And in case anyone thinks that we overplay the cult hand here on Dr. Bitcoin, here's what he had to say as a sign-off. "You're wrong, you're confused, you're devoting your life to attacking someone who's going to be honoured by the world. There's no way you'll ever be able to meaningfully apologise." So yeah, that serves me right for trying to convince someone who thinks that Craig Wright is going to one day be honoured by the world that they're wrong. Just as we were putting together the finishing touches to the podcast, we got something of a lawsuit corner stop press by way of a tweet from the recently victorious Hodlonaut. "Just got informed that the Norwegian Court of Appeals have allowed Craig's appeal. I will have to do it all over again. And I will." Now, Hodlonaut had previously informed us that this was an outcome he had anticipated, because appeals are almost always granted in Norway. And rather than it going to an appeals judge or panel, the entire trial gets held again. This means we'll have to sit through Wright's Bitcoin creation fairy tale and have his witnesses once again wheeled in to tell their own fairy stories. On the other hand, we get to sit through the KPMG expose once again, so that's something. As of yet, we don't know when this new trial will take place, but of course we'll keep you updated when we find out more. That's it for Lawsuit Corner for this month and indeed for 2022, but something tells me it will grow to Lawsuit Living Room next year. As many Craig Wright watchers will know by now, Wright has been very active on Twitter since rejoining earlier this year, with the man who complained to the judge in the Hodlonaut case that appearing in court cases took away from his development time, having clocked up over 7,300 tweets since returning in February. That's getting on for 200 tweets a week, every week for 9.5 months. Much of Wright's recent efforts have been a combination of fending off self-owns and telling everyone that BSV's sole reason for existing is micropayments, as was his intention with Bitcoin. This is despite Calvin Ayre spending the whole of 2021 telling everyone that BSV's raison d'etre was big data, calling BSV a monopolistic enterprise big data tool, and saying that Wright invented the world's best big data platform. Arthur, it seems that the BSV narrative has shifted from big data to micropayments. Two questions. What do you put this change down to, and do either have any basis in the white paper?
Yeah, Mark, I've learned a few things during my career, and my career is already long because, as you know, I'm already 50 plus and I'm working since I was 19. But one of those things that I learned is that when companies constantly change the narrative around their products, like every year, like BSV is doing, then either management of the company sucks or the product sucks. And in the case of BSV, I think both are true. Management.
I thought that was coming.
Yeah, you can wait for it. No, but seriously, I mean, management, the people on the helm, they certainly suck, and the product they support, the BSV blockchain and the BSV token used within the BSV infrastructure, yeah, therefore sucks at the same time. Because you guessed it, there is nothing about data in the Bitcoin white paper, and there is also nothing about micropayments in the white paper either. Those words aren't even mentioned once. And if we look beyond the white paper and pay attention to what Satoshi Nakamoto, and I mean the real one, of course, not Craig Wright, then we know why that is. For example, Satoshi was against putting arbitrary data in the Bitcoin blockchain, as he said once on the forum, it doesn't scale. And BSV proves on a daily basis that indeed it doesn't scale. And Satoshi also said, as I quoted before in this episode, that Bitcoin wasn't typically suitable for microtransactions at the moment that Satoshi said that in 2010. And it needed, as we know by now, a second layer scaling before Bitcoin became ready for microtransactions with Lightning Network.
We should also discuss another aspect of Wright's tweeting this month. On December 8th, he wrote, "To those who say I'm not Satoshi, why does Satoshi not discredit me? It would be easy to do anonymously, right? And Hal is not. He is easy to discredit. Because of you guys, his memory will be dragged through the mud in court. All those you claim are Satoshi but dead will be. Most critically, Hal and others have family. Hal shared with his wife. You claim an isolated person with no ties to the real world. Enjoy what is coming. You won't like it, but it is associated with what you wanted. Careful as to your wishes. Sorry, I created Bitcoin." Arthur, this talk of dragging Hal Finney's memory through the mud, what on earth is he talking about here? If anyone is dragging Finney's name through the mud, it's Craig Wright by pretending that all these conversations took place of which there is no credible evidence.
Yeah, exactly. I remember that Craig firmly discredited Hal Finney during a hearing in the Climate versus Wright case, and not that long ago he tweeted that Hal Finney wasn't such a bright and helpful person for Bitcoin after all, or something like that. Of course, this is completely untrue. Once, just before he left, he left a very strong compliment to Hal Finney when Hal Finney mentioned something about Bitcoin, that it was very strong machinery that had been created by Satoshi. And then Satoshi said back something like, wow, this means something coming from you, such a compliment, Hal. Thank you.
Finally, he's suggesting that because Hal Finney shared things with his wife, she could have called Wright out. Now, I don't believe that Finney created Bitcoin, but let's say that he did. There are several very good reasons why he would have wanted to maintain distance between his loved ones and the Satoshi name. First, there's the legal angle. Finney could have been worried about all the legal ramifications for his family if he was proven to have created Bitcoin, which Wright himself used in 2016, in fact, to try and get out of the coin signing. And second, we know that there have been extortion attempts made against Finney's family in the past, and that's only relating to what his personal Bitcoin stash could have been. If it was publicly known that he was Satoshi, those attacks would just increase by multiples given the millions of Bitcoin in the Satoshi wallets. So, in this world where Finney is Satoshi, it's entirely conceivable that he and his wife either made a pact where she would never publicly state that Finney was Satoshi for her own safety, no matter what, or he intentionally never told anyone he was Satoshi for the same reason. Either way, she has very little to gain by outing Wright in that way, and theoretically a lot to lose, doesn't she?
Yeah, maybe. I don't think he is Satoshi. I'm putting a lot of hours into researching Bitcoin, especially its early history, and I've never found any clue that Hal Finney was the inventor of Bitcoin. But given your scenario, yeah, very well possible. That's indeed conceivable.
In other BSV news, this month saw crypto exchange Bitfinex delisting the world's most despised shitcoin, first with margin trading and then entirely. Now, BSV supporters have a special place in their cold, dead hearts for Bitfinex. Their dislike dates back to the Bitcoin Cash fork of 2017, where the exchange prorated the amount of Bitcoin Cash its users would get based on existing margin positions. Things have only escalated from there, with CoinGeek rallying its readers around the anti-Bitfinex Tether bandwagon, citing claims of the manipulation of the Bitcoin price and questioning Tether's backing. The irony, of course, is that Bitfinex is one of the last big exchanges hosting BSV trading, but that means only one thing to clan BSV: conspiracy. Arthur, what is the BSV Bitfinex margin trading conspiracy?
Oh yeah, basically of course that Bitfinex is keeping the BSV price down and is suppressing it on every occasion they can. And since they are heavily involved with Tether too, of course Tether is part of the conspiracy too.
So the suggestion is that Bitfinex itself as a company is shorting BSV and profiting off the shorts. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Bitfinex formally announced its decision to stop BSV margin trading on November 23rd, with all positions, long and short, to be closed out on December 12th. This brought forth a great deal of hopium and the emergence of the Bitfinex shorting claims, with Kurt Vukert Jr. leading the charge. If BSV pumps as margin positions unwind, it'll be proof that the Tether Bitfinex lizards were actually suppressing the price the whole time. Others were equally as bullish and also celebrated the removal of BSV margin trading, with one respondent to Bitfinex's tweet saying that the exchange was halting margin trading because they can't afford to suppress Bitcoin BSV anymore, and warned people to get ready. Another added that he wouldn't be selling to desperate short sellers for less than $500, a more than 10 times increase on the price at the time. On November 28th, on the date that Bitfinex banned the opening of new margin positions, the price did indeed rise, 65% in fact, but only on Bitfinex and only to crash right back down where it had been before the spike. This was, many believed, just a trailer before the main event, although some began to realise that they might be in a bit of a pickle vis-à-vis their predictions of a rocket to the moon.
I've had this theory that there's tons and tons of predatory naked shorts of BSV, and that if it just unwound rapidly, that we could force a short squeeze, basically play it like GameStop, and make that happen. However, it's got to be coordinated to work that way. The fact that they planned it, the fact that they're kind of doing it slowly, I think they're trying to unwind it in such a way where they don't make BSV pump. They don't want to just pump out the market really, really hardcore. They're not our allies. They don't want BSV to all of a sudden, or BSV people to all of a sudden be a lot more rich than they were the day before. So I feel like they will very slowly try to unwind it. They'll try to push stuff off OTC, and they'll try to cover their stuff with other.
Around December 9th, Bitfinex delayed the closure of all positions by 7 days to the 19th. This immediately sparked another conspiracy. Bitfinex was giving itself time to buy more BSV at lower prices before the inevitable spike, in order to cover its own short positions. However, it seems that many people didn't get the message of the extended date and closed their short positions on the 11th and 12th anyway, with the value of shorts dropping to zero between the 12th and the 15th. Arthur, how did the inevitable BSV short squeeze play out?
Yeah, I followed it for a bit and it was very close to being a complete non-event, Mark. I mean, the BSV price came from just below $40. It went up to close to $50, making Kristen Ager Hansen think it had to do with the positive energy in the BSV community, as he tweeted. Yeah, it was hilarious. And then it dropped again to just above $40 in recent days. I think it's now hovering around $45 these days.
When the end of the world didn't happen, BSVers began scrabbling around for excuses, with one notable BSV supporter on Twitter claiming that the sudden disappearance of a large BSV short position on Bitfinex with no apparent impact on the price in its order books suggests to me that they handed off responsibility for this short to another entity, presumably at an agreed upon loss. However, there is a much more straightforward reason why the BSV price didn't explode as the shorts dropped. These people were looking at things the wrong way round. Shorts are measured in the volume of the coin being used to short, and as late as the 12th of December, there were 10,000 coins being used to short BSV on Bitfinex. It seems, however, that many of these buffoons thought that it was 10,000 Bitcoin that was being used to short BSV. Had that been the case, we would have been looking at a $160 million powder keg. As it was, because 10,000 BSV coins were instead being used as shorting material, the liquidity was just $400,000. Hardly rocket fuel. Arthur, this seems to me an extension of the kind of thing we get tarnished with. People on Team BSV can't believe that we do this for free because we can't stand what Craig Wright is trying to get away with. And it seems they also can't believe that individual random traders can, as a collective, equate to $400,000 worth of short positions on BSV. It has to be a conspiracy. It has to be one of their sworn enemy pushing them down. And yet, when one of their long-term theories turns out to be nothing but horse manure, or they realise they can't read order books properly, they still can't accept it.
Nope. But that's how the mindset of a cult member is, Mark.
True. The day after this ball of nothingness arrived, Tether CEO Paolo Ardoino confirmed on Twitter that Bitfinex would fully delist BSV, with the decision seeming to revolve around the potential for exchanges becoming embroiled in the clawing back of coins thanks to BSV's blacklisting tool. Calvin Ayre, who was using an old Twitter account, having been rather amusingly kicked off his existing one a few days ago, commented that original Bitcoin does not need to be trading on scam exchanges like Bitfinex. You guys are already under US criminal investigation, and that will sort itself out shortly. Of course, if it's a scam exchange, one wonders why Calvin hadn't yet asked for the squeaky clean, law-loving BSV to be removed from it at any point in the past 4 years, but there we are. The delisting itself will happen on December 29th, so it may have already taken place when you listen to this. But after this date, Bitfinex can add its name to the growing list of exchanges that have chosen to rid themselves of Satoshi's coin. Now, as those who are familiar with the goings-on around BSV will know, Calvin Ayre loves a prediction. So much so that every year he posts a hideously cringeworthy video on CoinGeek where he reviews the progress, or otherwise, that BSV has made that year and predicts what's to come in the following 12 months. To give you an idea of his success rate, in January 2020 he scored 1 out of 5, which included a prediction that by the end of the year, I think the price of BSV will be higher than any other token, including BTC, and in 2021, he scored 0 out of 3, giving him a total to date of 1 out of 8. So, it's time to see how he got on in 2022. So, here we go with prediction 1.
Perhaps nothing this year better illustrates the difference between the BSV and BTC camps than the former's efforts to fully digitize the island nation of Tuvalu's public records on the BSV blockchain. This project, the first fruits of which are expected to debut in 2022, was launched only after extensive consultations with the local community at both the executive and grassroots levels.
Arthur, did we see the first fruits of the Tuvalu project this year?
Can I be short?
Yes?
Nope. Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing.
Now, CoinGeek hasn't written about Tuvalu directly in about 1.5 years and has only touched on it obliquely in articles about other things. Yeah, as you say, we certainly didn't see any fruits, first or otherwise, in 2022, so we can firmly say that that prediction is a no. So that's a 0 for that one. Now here's prediction 2.
Speaking of ill-advised plans, BTC Maxi and Peter McCormack have both learned costly lessons this year, after UK courts reminded them that it doesn't matter how much they don't like Craig Wright, defamation is still a crime.
Seeing as the Hoddernaut UK case is still pending, we can't say whether he's right on that one or not, although the Norway loss doesn't bode well. But Arthur, can we say that Peter McCormack learned an expensive lesson this year about the cost of defamation?
Yeah, for a part we don't know it yet, and for a part we can say not really. McCormack had to pay literally a penalty of £1 British. But since they are still debating and a so-called cost judge going to look at the division of the costs, what we do know is that Judge Chamberlain has the opinion that previous already paid costs from the early days of this lawsuit should remain at Peter McCormack, and that is quite a firm amount. I've seen amounts of around $1 million. That should remain at Peter and will not be paid back, and in part Peter still has to pay a part of that even. This might go both ways in the near future. So it all depends on what the court judge is going to say about this.
Well, I'm going to give him half here because Hodlonaut has had to stump up a bit of cash so far, even though the trial hasn't taken place yet, and it is Christmas. So, on to Calvin Ayre's final prediction.
Then there's Cobra, the would-be anarchist who the UK courts ordered to stop infringing on Craig's copyright on the Bitcoin white paper. That verdict doesn't bode well for Copa, the developer Cobol that claims to revere the white paper while simultaneously conspiring to ensure BTC never fulfills the vision of Bitcoin contained in that very white paper. We expect to be celebrating Copa's comeuppance at this time next year.
Arthur, this video was posted on December 22nd, 2021. Has Calvin been celebrating Copa's comeuppance this week?
Nope. Again, nothing happened remotely close to that.
I would actually argue that the exact opposite has played out. Rather than Copa getting its comeuppance, it instead has a court date in 2024, so I think I'm half tempted to take away his half point now.
Fully agree, Mark. Do it.
On a side note, this issue of end-of-year predictions and promises throws up something from April this year involving W&K, the company that Wright owes $143 million to.
I won't go into the details. You'll see what happens there. I'll be paying later this year, which will annoy a lot of people. But
are you going to pay in Bitcoin or BS or BTC or BSV?
You'll see how. But the reality there is Ayre owns less than a third of that company. So the next thing will be the fact that he has taken control and abused that position. So that'll be the next thing against him. So by the end of all this, I'll pay and Ayre will probably end up bankrupt.
Now, as for Ayre Kleinman owning less than a third of the company, we'll come to that in a special episode next year. But Arthur, we're coming to the end of 2022. Did it annoy you when Craig Wright paid up this year?
Oh, absolutely. I was so bloody annoyed when Craig Wright paid nothing. Nada. I mean, no, this is irony, Mark. This is just irony. Because Craig is such a notorious non-payer with a lot of senseless excuses why he couldn't or he shouldn't or he wouldn't pay up. So it didn't surprise me much to see that he didn't pay a penny to WK or related. On the other hand, what surprises me somewhat is that why we didn't see Ayre Kleinman, or in this case his counsel, taking the lead in making Craig pay one way or the other. So I'm not sure what's going on there, to be honest.
This conversation was referenced by someone on Twitter who asked, out of interest, you mentioned you would make payment to W&K this year. Is that still on the cards? Wright's response was entirely reasonable and in keeping with his public declaration. Is that any of your business? The questioner replied, no, it's why I said out of interest. You had publicly stated, so thus I was simply raising it again as the year comes to a close. No disrespect intended. Wright still seemed to be triggered by someone inquiring as to whether he was going to stick to his word, however, and replied, it's a private company. I'm not facing bankruptcy. I'm not being sued by the company. The point that I'm making is, why do you think you have to ask that? Do you think that it's my place to override the privacy of the people who do have the majority control of that company? Arthur, aside from the fact that Wright is simply trying to deflect after someone called him out on this, in a very cordial manner, it has to be said, the lawsuit that his wife has started against W&K is obviously public knowledge, and Calvin Ayre has stated it as the reason why Wright hasn't paid W&K. So whose privacy exactly does he think he'll be overriding if he pays what a court has told him to pay to W&K?
Yeah, well, let's indeed say that's how Craig Wright is trying to obfuscate the subject and derail the whole discussion. But in the end, I have no idea whose privacy is in danger here. No idea.
So overall then, depending on how generous we're being with Calvin's half point, he's either scored a half or 0 out of 3, continuing his terrible run of form. Now, fortunately for us, Calvin released his 2023 predictions right around the time of our recording. Arthur, shall we look into these while we're here?
Yeah, I saw it already. It was a pretty amazing recording, and I'm sure you know what I'm thinking about, Mark.
Oh, yes, I certainly do. So, yes, the first thing to note is that in the video there is a marginally full glass of... I can't even say full. There's a glass that marginally contains some red wine on Calvin's desk, and it's pretty clear where the rest has gone. Calvin Ayre is smashed. There's no other word for it. He's rolling his eyes, he's rolling his words, he's pointing at the camera like Lord Kitchener. And let's not forget, this guy is trying to attract governments, actual governments to his project, and he can't even do an end-of-year message sober. Now, Calvin's first prediction is on the subject of BSV transaction valuations.
The total number of daily transactions on BSV reached an astonishing 35 million in September. 2023 will be the year that transaction value follows volume as developers look to harness the benefits of BSV's cost-efficient platform. Gaming and remittance companies will lead this charge, which will attract interest by other companies, government entities, and thought leaders across all sectors globally that touch big data for any fashion.
Arthur, finally, we're going to see some government adoption of BSV.
You wish. Yeah, well, or better, Calvin wished.
Yeah,
I mean, those transaction metrics are so far only short-lived circle jerks between Calvin Ayre-controlled entities who are testing, quote-unquote, as they call it. So there were a few spikes over the last year. Some were around 5 million transactions per day, and a few others were above 20 to 35 million, I remember. But when you look at the last full month, for example, it is between 500,000 to 1 million transactions a day. Does this tell you that government adoption is coming close or is already happening?
Not quite. Now, at this point, it's worth looking back at Ayre's predictions over time, which we can do thanks to Cyber@2600 on Twitter, who put together a lovely collage of Ayre's recent adoption predictions. December 13th, 2018. Bitcoin SV is poised to explode in 2019 now that nobody is tripping it. The original Bitcoin will scale massively and show that it is already ready for prime-time enterprise adoption. January 18th, 2020. Everyone, the focus has to be on building the amazing applications that will change the world that can only work on original Bitcoin BSV protocol. This year is going to be the year of massive enterprise adoption on Bitcoin. December 26th, 2020. Correct, 2021 is the year of enterprise adoption rolling out. On a more serious note, or as serious as we can be, Arthur, what's your opinion on the value of BSV transactions catching up with the volume?
Yeah, I can be short here. I mean, it's pretty simple, Mark. It's not going to happen. And the reason for that is indeed pretty simple too. In the BSV realm, they have been making mind-blowing announcements for many years, from Airdata to Tuvalu in the beginning, and Twedge and CryptoFights more recently, but nothing came from it, simply because either those parties that were announced or have themselves announced that they would work with BSV, they realize in time that BSV is not the stable and massively scaling environment that they thought that it was, or they become aware of the total scam that BSV is, with cosplayer Wright involved as a Satoshi pretender, and they don't want anything to do with that reputation-wise. And that brings back in memory that, for example, the Australian government once refused to sponsor a BSV-related project because they said it's technically not stable and reputation-wise, it has no reputation and it is involved in a lot of lawsuits. So yeah, then when even the Australian government is looking at it like that and is even paying, I mean, it's already a miracle that they pay attention to a tiny project as BSV. And if they make those type of statements and refusing to sponsor something BSV related, yeah, that's pretty worse, of course.
Well, luckily, Calvin Ayre had a great example of this large-scale adoption.
For example, the BSV-based metaverse and Web3 streaming platform RAD, in which Ayre Ventures was lead investor, has just been acquired by premium movie streaming service Row8. Row8 will soon announce a technology licensing deal with Enchain, and I anticipate a flurry of similar announcements in 2023.
Arthur, have you ever heard of this Hollywood giant Row8?
Row8? Nope. I have never heard about it, Mark.
Well, no, I hadn't either, so I did some digging. Now, Row 8 claims to offer Hollywood films at low prices, but guess what? It's a trap. Online viewers cite a fake pricing scam that lures people in with discounts that disappear when you sign up, while those who have persevered experience poor performance such as buffering, freezing and crashing. One reviewer summed up the product by saying that it doesn't work and steals your money, which is quite fitting for a company now dealing with BSV, I think.
Absolutely.
Now, Calvin also touched, of course, on Craig Wright's legal affairs, offering the following drunken take.
Mainstream media is beginning to recognize the implication of nChain's ever-growing and world-leading IP stack, and I expect this to be a major theme in press coverage in the year ahead. Fortunately, Wright's recent appeal of an incorrect Norway defamation ruling, a fight he is destined to win as the more experienced appeals court judges understand that cyberbullying remains illegal in Norway, will mark the end of these cancelling efforts and lead to greater public awareness of all things BSV.
Arthur, what can we even say at this point? He's made this inexperienced claim before, hasn't he?
Yeah, he did, on Twitter in this case. At this point, I also don't know what to say, Mark, because when it comes to Craig's legal cases, Calvin is stumbling from one disappointment to the other, and I don't know how they manage to do that all the time, but they just either rewrite history or they give things like damning rulings, very clear, where Craig's ass is being kicked, or that Craig announcing and executing an appeal, like in the Holland Norway case. They give everything a totally delusional twist, and it's amazing to watch, let me tell you, Mark.
Also, this suggestion that mainstream media are going to suddenly wake up to BSV. The only time crypto ever gets a mention in mainstream media is when prices are crashing or there's some hack or a scam like FTX. I highly doubt the promise and potential of BSV is going to change their minds. I mean, the only thing I can think is that he means there's going to be some paid pieces in Forbes or something. We end this month, and indeed this year, on a very fitting note, another prediction, or rather a threat, from Craig Wright for 2023. In 2023, I will give an offer to save BTC Core and allow for Core to trade honestly. To exist, I expect that they will reject it. If they do, BTC ends. Let's see what they choose. Arthur, we know he's losing his mind here, but let's entertain this for a moment. Let's say this is all part of this 5D chess game we've always been told about. How do you think he envisions bringing this off? Who exactly is he making this offer to, and how does he end BTC if whoever it is doesn't acquiesce?
Knowing that BTC, Bitcoin, is as decentralized as it can be, there are developers that he can talk to, there are nodes, mining nodes, full nodes owners that he can talk with. There is a massive infrastructure of exchanges and data service websites that he has to talk to, and he is going to make them an offer that he can't refuse, and otherwise he will pull the plug. Yeah, good luck, Craig. Nee, it's just craziness from a delusional mind.
I think he's been drinking Calvin Ayre's car stuff. He's under the desk drinking the wine that falls out of the glass.
There you go.
Wright also made another end-of-year resolution which garnered a bit of attention. I have been too angry for too long as I cared for external validation. That ends. The only validation I seek now is from my family and from seeing my ideas come to fruition and to be used by the world. Not everyone wants what I have to offer. Arthur, many observers have suggested that this is his way of stepping back from trying to get public recognition of his Satoshiness. Is that how you read this, or are people looking too much into it?
Yeah, maybe we're looking too much into it, Mark. Time will tell, but we've seen these backtracks from Craig before. Remember 2016, the BBC News TV interview in April that was broadcast in May around the failed signing sessions?
Mm-hmm.
Near the end of his coming out as Satoshi in that interview, Craig told the BBC that I will come on camera once and I will never ever be on camera again on any TV station or any media, ever. But we all know how that promise turned out, right?
Well, didn't he also say earlier this year that he wasn't going to speak to any news outlet that had the word cryptocurrency in the name or something along those lines? And he broke it almost immediately, and I'm sure he's broken it many times since then.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. You can't take it at face value, can you?
Nee, those type of statements, nope.
Well, that brings us to the end of our December update, and indeed our last update of 2022. Arthur, it's been quite a year for Craig Wright and BSV. How would you sum up 2022 for them, and what can you see on the horizon in 2023?
With 2023, with the risk that I'm next in line with Calvin Ayre with failed predictions. But no, I would summarize 2022 as another year of unfulfilled promises and failed predictions for BSV. And a year full of lost lawsuits for Craig Wright. I mean, think the Climate prejudgment interest that he lost in early 2022. Peter McCormack was actually still a massive loss, also reputation-wise mostly. Hodlnaut in Norway was a big loss. The Bitcoin developers in the Pineapple hack case, he lost them all. I mean, Craig lost every court case that he was involved with in 2022 where the counterparty showed up. I mean, we also have to remember Cobra Bitcoin, who did not show up, and then he had a default judgment in his favor.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I think 2023 is going to be a very difficult year for our friends on the other side, because the trend is not the friend, so to say.
Well, whatever happens in 2023 for Craig Wright, Calvin Ayre and the rest of the Hair Bear bunch, you can be sure that Dr. Bitcoin will have you covered every step of the way. Before we sign off for the year, don't forget that while this may be our last monthly update of 2022, it isn't our final show, because we'll be seeing it out with part 3 of our Wright vs McCormack special series, where we go over this week's rulings in much more detail. To get this episode, and indeed all our bonus episodes over the past year, you can either download them individually from our website for a small consideration, or you can get the whole lot in one go by signing up to the Dr. Bitcoin Supporters Club in return for a small monthly fee. All the revenue we receive goes directly towards the operation of the podcast, so not only are you getting extra Craig Wright nonsense in your ear holes, you're also helping us to spread the word. For further details on how to download bonus episodes or become a Dr. Bitcoin supporter, head to our website www.drbitcoinpod.com and prepare yourself for much more of where this came from. So, that wraps us up for this year, but we couldn't leave without a heartfelt thank you to every single one of our listeners. Your support through this year, and indeed since we started the podcast, has been invaluable, and without you tuning in every month, this simply wouldn't be worth doing. However you're celebrating over the next couple of weeks, or even if you're not, we thank you for being part of this movement and for coming along with us for the ride. Arthur, it's been a pleasure to have spent the year with you dissecting the BSV and Craig Wright nonsense. I hope you have a fantastic Christmas, and we'll return in January to do this all again.
Yeah, ho ho ho. Looking forward to it, Mark. But to all our dedicated followers and listeners, our fellow Satoshi debunkers, and you know who you are. Let's not forget my Medium readers. You all have a great Christmas and a marvelous 2023, and I hope to see you all again next year too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto. If you enjoyed what you heard, we'd really appreciate a rating or even a quick review on your platform of choice in order to get this out to as many people as possible. For early access to episodes and exclusive bonus content, please consider becoming a supporter through Patreon or Anchor. See the details in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your chosen platform in order to get new episodes the moment they drop. And if you'd like to follow us on Twitter for podcast announcements and other nonsense, you'll find us at Dr. Bitcoin Pod. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll speak to you again soon.
You've been listening to Dr. Bitcoin, the man who wasn't Satoshi Nakamoto. Written by Mark Hunter, with additional material by Arthur Van Pelt. Editing and production by Mark Hunter. This has been a Contented Media production.